Welcome to the May 29th meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee. Mr. Chairman, we are prepared to begin the meeting whenever you're ready. We are also streaming live on YouTube.
Thank you, Virginia. Good morning, everyone. This is the Technical Advisory Committee on May 29, 2020. Starting the committee meeting today, I'd like to call this meeting to order at 10:02 a.m. My name is Nabil Mohaisen. I'll be chairing this meeting this morning. We will also have a team of folks working to ensure that this meeting runs smoothly. Today's meeting was advertised on MetroPlan's Orlando's website and social media, as well as through targeted emails. Florida Sunshine Law typically requires a quorum to be physically present in a room for a government meeting. However, Governor DeSantis suspended this requirement in an executive order, allowing the government boards to conduct business using virtual meetings. This order has been extended through early July this year. Next, we'll be watching a short video to review the virtual meeting guidelines. These will help our meeting flow smoothly. Go ahead.
Welcome to MetroPlan Orlando's virtual meeting. Here are some things you should know. Board and committee members are active participants, and members of the public are observers. Our chairperson will make sure to keep the meeting flowing. Please keep your microphone or phone line muted unless recognized to speak. Make sure to pay attention to your video controls as well. Participants are welcome to use the raise hand feature to ask questions after presentations. This feature can be found when clicking on the participants icon. When recognized by the chair to speak, you can unmute yourself. Please make sure to speak clearly so everyone can hear you. You may also submit questions via the chat box by clicking on the chat icon. A moderator will relay your question. Thank you.
So we'll keep the microphones muted unless you have been recognized to speak, and we'll use the raise hand feature to participate in the discussion. There are two public comment points at this meeting. Members of the public who wants to speak will use the raise hand feature found in the participants tab. If attending by phone, you can hit the *9 to raise your hand and request to be recognized. Call to the microphone, you will be temporarily unmuted by staff. You will ask to state your name and contact information for the record. We also accepted comments by email and phone messages before the meeting. The guidelines for the public comments are posted at the MetroPlan Orlando virtual meeting. MetroPlanOrlando.org/virtual meeting.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. We're getting just a little bit of feedback on that may be coming from your end. So if you're close to your microphone, you may want to bring your paperwork back. Thank you. And I apologize.
Try that. And you'll let me know if this sounds better once I do that.
You do sound great. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So we were talking about posting the public comments at the MetroPlanOrlando.org/virtual meetings. Public comments are received before the meeting will be read by staff at the conclusion of this meeting. We want this and all of future meetings to be accessible to all. Participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact MetroPlan Orlando. At this point, I just want to say that it seems difficult to us initially to envision our highly interactive meetings on a virtual platform, but seeing how smooth the past meetings have gone just shows great proof for our good team collaboration. So thank you all for being a good team players here. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Keith Caskey on the MetroPlan Orlando staff agenda for review.
Mr. Chairman and committee members and all those attending online. I just have some information that I'm going to go over and then we can proceed with the agenda. I just wanted to start out by thanking everyone for working with us as we conduct these virtual meetings, and we remain dedicated to having good discussions about transportation planning in Central Florida. And we're doing our best in this environment to stay transparent and accessible to the public, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. As many of you are aware, we completed our first cycle of meetings and board meetings in April and early May, and we felt that our first attempt was successful, but we are committed to improving the virtual meeting experience where we can. We received input from many of you and from other participants through our post-event surveys, and we have adopted some of the changes you suggested for the meeting cycle. So thank you for taking the time to give us your input. Although we won't send a formal survey today or after future meetings, we're always interested in hearing about your virtual meeting experience, any ideas you have for making these meetings better. We're actually extending our virtual offerings next month by taking our annual Transportation Improvement Program public meeting online. And that meeting will be on June 22nd and will include some new ways to participate in the important evaluation of our 5-year work plan. You've already received a link to a video preview of the draft TIP with your meeting materials, and you'll have a chance to ask me questions about that later in our meeting. And you'll be getting more information about the June 22nd public meeting in the next week or so, and we hope to see you at that virtual event if your schedule permits. As the chairman mentioned, we'll be using the raise hands feature to recognize committee members during the meeting and to call on members of the public during the comment time. So if you've joined us on the phone only without the video screen, please use *6 to mute and unmute your line, and please use *9 to raise your virtual hand so the meeting host can see that you wish to be recognized. You'll see that there's a chat feature on your toolbar. This communicates with all panelists in this meeting, which includes committee members, staff, and presenters. Please only use this if you are having technical issues or need assistance. A full record of the chat comments will be included with the public record of this meeting. Also, I wanted to mention that we have 2 alternate members on this morning. Han Lim is representing Don Marcotte for the City of Winter Park, and Alyssa Ida is representing Kimberly Tracy for the City of Maitland. So, Mr. Chairman, that completes my announcements this morning, and there are no changes to the agenda. And now we'd like to take attendance, and I'll ask Ms. Lisa Smith to call the roll so we can confirm a quorum for the meeting.
Thank you, Keith. Ms. Smith?
Yes, good morning. Andre Anderson. Brett Blackadar. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Kelly Brock.
Here.
Scott Brown. Christopher Cairns.
Here.
Michael Cash.
Here.
Gus Castro.
Here.
Crystal Clem.
Present.
Ashley Cornelison. I know she's Ashley Cornelison.
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you. Jeff Davis. Joshua DeFries.
Here.
Hazem Elisar.
Present.
Brad Friel. Ed Gold.
Here.
Glenn Hammer. Will Hawthorne.
Here.
Jim Hitt. I'm sorry, that's Pam Richmond for the City of Apopka.
Present.
Conroy Jacobs.
Present.
John Dredge.
Here.
Steve Krug. I'll come back. Hong Lim,
Present.
Fred Milch,
Present.
Mary Moskowitz,
Present.
Nabil Muhaisen,
Present.
Renzo Nastasi,
Here.
Miles O'Keefe,
Present.
Tawny Allure,
Present.
Tom Radzai, Lee Pulliam,
Here.
Michael Rigby, Rachel Giranella.
Giranella, present. Alternate for
Giranella.
Christopher Schmidt.
Okay, thank you. Ramon Sonorens,
Here.
Ian Seconia,
Here.
Shad Smith,
Here.
Matt Sudemeyer, Stephen Thorpe, Alyssa Edie,
Present.
Bill Wharton.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. We'll now move to the next item on our agenda, which is action items. We will now hear public comments on today's action items. Do we have people who want to speak on any of the action items? If so, please use the raise hand function found at the bottom of your screen or by pressing *9 on your phone keypad. When I call your name, the host will unmute your microphone. You will see a button pop up that says host wants to unmute you. Please accept that, which will prompt to activate your microphone. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record. Please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. Are there any comments at this time? Okay, hearing none. Are there any written comments that were submitted before the meeting?
No, Mr. Chairman, we have no written comments.
Thanks, Mr. Caskey. We now will move to the presentation portion of our meeting. And today we have 5 presentations listed on today's agenda. In the interest of time, however, one was pre-recorded and the link was sent to you earlier. You will, however, be able to ask questions about this presentation that was sent to you earlier this morning. Please use the raise hand function please use the raise hand function to be recognized if you want to ask a question. You may raise your hand during the presentation to indicate that you want to ask a question, but we will hold all questions until the presentation ends. If you're having audio issues, you can type your questions in the chat box and the moderator will relay your questions to us. First presentation, as mentioned, a preview of the 2021-2025 Transportation Improvement Plan. And this presentation, as I mentioned, was pre-recorded. Right before the, I hope you had a chance to watch this presentation before. Mr. Caskey has presented on the next 5-year work program. Our agenda was very busy today, so we hope to save time by sending this out ahead of time. Information about the TIP also will be presented at the June TAC meeting, as well as the June 22nd public meeting before it goes on the MetroPlan board on July 10th. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Caskey today based on the previewed presentation? Please use the raise hand button and unmute yourself when recognized. Any questions of that pre-recorded presentation, please? Okay, host, do you see any hands? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, there is one hand, Josh DeFries.
Okay, Mr. DeFries, you're recognized. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. First of all, Keith, I think you did a great job on the presentation. There was just one clarification that I that I wanted to make on that, and it was for the TRIP candidate projects. So you mentioned the PPL portion of the TIP. Although the Neptune and Simpson PD&E are listed as TRIP candidates, TRIP funds were not previously received, and it sounded in the presentation like they were. So I just wanted to make that clarification that the PD&Es were locally funded, with Simpson PD&E wrapping up and the Narcoossee PD&E nearing completion, which will depend on when public hearings or once they get allowed for federally funded projects, since the PD&E for Neptune is following the federal process. And so just a point of clarification there for the presentation. And then also with the TIP review, I don't know if this is a question for Keith or maybe an FDOT representative if we have one online. First of all, I'm certainly very happy to see the quad road for Giant Parkway and Pleasant Hill, as well as the I-4 DDI on there. And then also on the current TIP, the 1792 PD&E from County Road 54 to west of Point Siena, it's project 4372001. I didn't see that on the TIP any longer. I think it may have been moved forward to this current year, but I was wondering if there could be any clarification provided on that one.
So Josh, could you highlight the 3 points that you had mentioned, or 2 points?
The first point was Neptune and Simpson in Keith's presentation of the TIP. They did not receive TRIP funds, just for clarification, it was locally funded. And then the other clarification was whether or not, or I guess what happened with the 1792 PD&E. Again, that was project 4372001, because I didn't see that on the proposed TIP.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Caskey?
I'll have to check that, check with the FDOT staff. I don't know if they have any information on that this morning, but
Hey, Keith.
Actually,
it's
I can
Anna.
assist too.
Yeah,
Anna.
yeah, Anna's on the.
It's Anna. I can speak to that. The 1792 PD&E is currently funded in fiscal year 21 and is moving forward.
Does that answer your question, Mr. DeFries?
Yeah, maybe I missed it. I didn't see it in there, but if it's moving forward, that's great. Great news.
No
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mr. Caskey. Thanks, Ms. Taylor. Any other questions for Mr. Caskey on that presentation?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make one note that, when I went back and reviewed the presentation, I realized that when I went over the toll road projects, I forgot to mention that CFX, of course, also has their major capacity projects either underway or funded for construction, and they should be sending us their updated project list sometime within the next few weeks. And of course, we'll be including that in the TIP as well.
Excellent. Thanks,
Mr. Chairman.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you do have a hand with Lorenzo Nastasi.
Good morning. I have a quick question. Is there a document available for the new TIP?
Yes, the preview document was included. There was a link on the agenda that has the main sections of the new TIP.
The problem is that we can't get into YouTube. To view your presentation.
You mean during this, you couldn't get into YouTube prior to this presentation, Mr. Natasi?
So the county does not have the ability to get into YouTube from our work computers. So what I'm asking is there a hard copy or an electronic copy that we can take a look at?
I mean, I can send you the slide presentation, yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Caskey on the MetroPlan or from the MetroPlan Orlando staff? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next presentation, which is a preview of the 2026-2040 prioritized project list by Mr. Nick Lepp of MetroPlan Orlando staff. Mr. Lepp.
Good morning, everybody. Let's see. I have control. All right, it's that time of year again. As Keith had the presentation for the preview of the TIP, we're also doing a preview of the prioritized project list with performance-based planning. The list that I'm going to be presenting to you today is the updated kind of strike through and underline, identifying projects. If you had the download from the agenda, projects in orange are ones that were fully funded. Projects in yellow had some updates or may need some updates following this meeting. And then new projects were identified in green. And we had quite a significant number of projects added this year. As most of you know, the project priority list is a direct link from the 2040 long range plan, bringing projects into the transportation improvement program, identified for kind of the next 5th year, what's coming up next. There is that direct linkage to the cost feasible plan. If it is not in the cost feasible plan, it's not eligible to be prioritized and to move forward into the transportation improvement program. And our project priority list is fiscally constrained as it's tied to that cost feasible plan of federal and state funds within the 2040 long range plan. The list is organized to support regional priorities and MetroPlan's TMA funding priorities. Just for some point of clarification, most of you have seen this before, but the map on the left-hand side identifies the national highway system and state roads, which is one of our project priority lists. And then the map on the right side identifies the remaining federal aid eligible roadways, which represents the TMA funding in the 4 other lists and policies that MetroPlan Orlando uses. So there's multiple lists that we use with the national highway system. Those include roadway widenings and complete street improvements, as well as transportation systems operations and management, bicycle, pedestrian, safety, and sun trail improvements. Those are all on one list for the national highway system and state roads for prioritization and for programming. And then we create other lists which focus on MetroPlan's TMA funding policy of identifying 32% for roadway and complete streets, 17% for regional trails and safe routes to schools, 21% for TISMO projects, and 30% for capital, which I'll get into the capital projects later on when we go down the list. Okay, I apologize, slight delay. There we are. So just to highlight, we presented this back in February, but as we've been managing the TMA funds and supported board emphasis areas since 2017, we were spending about 52% of our funds on those board emphasis areas of complete streets, safety, access to transit. Since then, we have been increasing that, and now we're up to, one slide changed. And I should remember this off the top of my head, but I don't. All right, we can please go back. I have lost control. Thank you. We're now up to just this past in fiscal year 1920, up to 82% of our TMA funds are being spent to support those board emphasis areas, like I mentioned, regional trails, safety, complete streets, and access to transit and sunrail. I think host, whoever is moving the mouse, is taking away my controls when I'm trying to change the slides. So please stop. Thank you. There we go. Our project priority list is based on the 4 federal performance measures as we look at performance-based planning and ranking, mainly tied to the state highway and national roadway system, which includes safety, travel time reliability, bridge and pavement condition, and as well as transit asset management. We've actually applied this to the entire federal aid network, along with 9 other performance measures, which was developed in coordination with everybody here on the technical advisory and transportation systems management committees to determine these performance measures that really meet our regional intent. So here's some highlights that we have this year coming up. Projects that were funded, State Road 50 from Chulio to 520. This was part of that Colonial Parkway project, which is not going forward as the Colonial Parkway. It is just the construction of the 6-lane portion out to 520, and that has been fully funded. As well as Josh mentioned, the John Young Parkway Pleasant Hill Road interim project has been funded. The complete street improvements on Orange Ave going through Edgewood. And then 7 other projects have been removed from the PPL because they've either been fully funded or no longer cost feasible. And then we received 5 from District 5, their list of routes of significance, which includes 30 corridors for TSMO strategies and monitoring. Within the MetroPlan program, we saw 5 projects funded, which include Edgewater Drive. 17th Street was actually funded locally, which is why it's being removed from the list. Rouse Road and University, as well as Kissimmee, Thin Cloud Connector, and the Pine Hills Trail were both fully funded, and Little Econ Trail. We also received 6 new complete street projects within Seminole County, Osceola County, Longwood, and Apopka, 17 TSMO projects, 3 new safe routes to schools, and 3 regional trails. For the transit capital projects, there's going to be a little change in the project priority list. With the policy of funding 30% of the TMA funds going to transit projects, we need a list of transit projects to associate those funds to. So we've been working with Links, and they will be providing us with a list of projects that would go towards either the bus replacement or system expansion. But this year we also received for the first time applications from local governments for a transit project, which is looking at the Sunrail parking feasibility. So we've included the Meadowwoods, Tupperware, and Poinciana stations within the project priority list to look at design and construction to alleviate the capacity problem of parking. First, MetroPlan Orlando with Osceola County and Orange County will be developing a Sunrail parking feasibility study to get more details of what needs to be designed and constructed. Links has also added quite a few projects, including 8 new transit asset and technology improvements and a few other corridor studies. There were no added projects taken off of the TRIP list. However, there were 3 new ones added by Osceola County and 6 new ones added by the city of Apopka. And these are those larger widening projects that would exceed the amount dedicated under MetroPlan's TMA policy for roadway and complete streets. Some of the changes that we're going to be seeing coming up with this new 2045 MTP. The cost feasible list will be organized very similar to the project priority list, where we'll be looking at the national highway and state roads, focusing mainly on those other arterial funds that DOT dedicates to our area. We'll also be incorporating the 20% DDR funding off the other arterials for premium transit, and then another 10% for off-system projects, which comes out of the revenue forecasting report. Complete street regional trails will all be programmed using TMA funds. Excuse me, we'll be updating this list every year, more like updating the cost feasible list. And we're looking to reduce that down to a 10-year list. Instead of having 20 years of projects to rank, we'll be looking at that first 10 years within the MTP, cost feasible plan. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have right now.
Thanks, Mr. Lepp. Any questions from Mr. Lepp, please?
Chairman Bill Warden with Seminole County.
Go ahead, Bill.
Nick, when will these be prioritized themselves?
We're working through the performance-based prioritization right now. Apologize, usually we have the rankings for you at this time, but due to what we've been all going through, it took a while and we were giving everybody some extra time to make sure that we incorporated all of the projects within this list and we didn't leave any out. So when we return to you in June and July, you will see a ranked list, but we'll also send it out before that. That way we can get any comments incorporated before we adopt the project priority list.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I appreciate the issues we're all going through, but just want to make sure we have enough time to review all that as we move forward.
We do. Technically, we need to present a project priority list to the Department of Transportation by September. So if there is not sufficient time for review and comments, we could postpone the adoption of the project priority list to accommodate that.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, I see other hands come up. Mr. Blackadar, City of Altamont.
Hey, Nick, you may have, I think you mentioned this earlier, but it wasn't clear. So the new projects that were submitted, like we had one where we've already had some correspondence back and forth with DOT and some conference calls with their team. So are those projects still going through a process? Are they part of your, what you're going to reprioritize now?
So the projects that will be reprioritized will be the ones that don't have a phase already funded in the Transportation Improvement Program. So we will continue to fund the remaining phases to make sure that projects get through completion and implemented before we rank and we come up with a new project. So anything that has started the process will not be passed over when we reprioritize during the performance-based planning. The number one priority is making sure projects are finished and complete first before a new phase is entered.
All right. Next raised hand is for Mr. Nastasi. Mr. Nastasi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick question. I noticed that the State Road 50 project from Giuliotto to 520 has been taken off the priority list and it shows that it's fully funded. So again, this is probably a question for DOT and Turnpike, which I've asked several times before. So if the widening of 50 is fully funded, how is that meshing with the Colonial Parkway project, which is a Turnpike project? My understanding was that those two projects would be merged into a single project. So if you have full funding for the widening, but there's nothing that shows any coordination with the Turnpike for the limited access portion of it, just trying to figure out who's doing what when.
Yeah, I will have to default to the Turnpike on that one. Sayosi, if you are on, if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear fine.
Okay, so as far as the State Road 50 project, what I know is that the Giuliotto Road to 520 is a District 5 project. As far as the Turnpike goes, we've went through the PD&E process and through the financial analysis, we've decided not to fund any future phases.
So if I could, Mr. Chairman, so I guess my next question is, does that mean that the Colonial Parkway project that was being done by the Turnpike is no longer being pursued and we're just moving forward with the 6 laning of Colonial Road, State Road 50?
Yes.
So the Turnpike is not moving forward. So that's it. No more project there.
Yes, sir. I believe we've went over this through the State Road 408 to 50 widening meeting. We don't have anything programmed in the future for this project. It's
let me see if I can clarify my question. Let me see if I can clarify my question. So am I hearing that the Colonial Parkway Turnpike project is no longer a viable project and District 5 is moving forward with the original widening of State Road 50 from Chuliota to 520.
As
And
far
if
as I
that's the
know,
case,
yes.
I'd like to have, if that's the case, I'd like to have confirmation, written confirmation from the Turnpike that the Turnpike is no longer pursuing that project.
Turnpike is, we're in the process of getting a written statement on that currently.
Do you know when that might happen?
Right now, we're in a good time. It should be before the board meeting, the MPO board meeting, and maybe presented at the board meeting. So,
Well, can you please, again, I don't want to belabor this, but could you please let me know before the board meeting? I don't want it to be a surprise at the board meeting that this project is no longer being pursued by the Turnpike.
if at all possible, yes, sir. I'll try.
That is the intent, Renzo. We're trying to get everything confirmed before the board meeting.
Okay, as long as it's not last minute, because this is an issue for us.
Understood.
Okay, so perhaps between Nick and Mr. Fine, there should be an email generated to let Mr. Nastasi know what the situation is, sometimes in June prior to the board meeting if possible.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Nastasi. The next hand was by Mr. Conroy Jacobs. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, I know you mentioned that you have until September to present your priority list, but I wanted to find out from you if you had a target date for when you will finish your performance ranking system.
My target is to have it done with plenty of time for all committees to review prior to the committee meeting. But depending on how many comments we get back, I plan on having it done within the next week. So that way the committees have at least 2 weeks to review before agenda packets go out. And if there are comments, significant comments, we could postpone the adoption or address them there at the committee meeting.
Okay, thank you, because we have reviewed and we have some minor comments that we wanted to share.
Okay, I will set up a time with you.
Thank you.
All right, the next hand up was for Mr. Shad Smith. Mr. Smith, please proceed.
Yeah, I think you might have just answered my question because I had some minor comments on some of the items for Longwood too. And I just want to know how you wanted to go about that. They're just small things. So for the most part, the one question I did have was there's a bunch of them on that list that was attached that were green that called them route of significance. Did you say something about that? Did I miss it? What are all those? I mean, that's a ton of items on there and there's no information, just as route of significance.
Correct. This was a list that was provided from DOT. It's identification of corridors. It's not necessarily project specific or any project attached to it, but I prefer if DOT is available to speak more on the routes of significance.
Does that answer your question?
DOT, are you
well,
able
I was
to
hoping the
provide a little
DOT
bit
would
more?
reply. Yeah, because it's once again, the DOT's throwing projects at us and doesn't give us any information, kind of like they did the last meeting. And then we got the memo from yesterday from Mr. Caskey on that, finally.
Nick, is there somebody from
this
DOT that can answer?
Yeah, this is Anna from DOT. I'll have to get with Jeremy Dilmore on that. He's been leading the routes of significance initiative.
I mean, what do you know anything about it? I mean, it says it's a TSMO type. Of course, there's no performance measure even listed for it. So what are they trying to do? Is it safety? Is it, timing things? Anything at all would be helpful. It's a lot of projects all of a sudden they threw in there.
I think it's travel time reliability. but let me verify that for you. I'll try to get it before the end of this meeting.
And yes,
Okay,
this was
thank
a
you.
list provided by DOT, which we added to our project priority list just to ensure that there wouldn't be any funding issues down the road if there was a technology or TISMO project that occurred on these corridors, which is why they were included in the list.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you.
Chairman. Hello, Mr. Chairman. Hi. Relative significance are roadways that the department is targeting for future deployment of TISMO strategies, making these roadways smarter, if you will, through technology, in preparation for future connected and autonomous vehicles. It's part of the department's readiness effort for these types of vehicles, as well as just creating roadways that are going to be able to collect information from vehicles, as well as transmit information to vehicles into other infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
You're welcome.
I have one more hand up, and in effort of time, I would like for Mr. Hazem Al-Assar to go ahead and proceed. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes, if you would, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a follow-up question regarding the SR50 project, because there were 2 segments on that project. One is east of Chiliota and one is west of Chiliota. The one that was discussed was east of Chiliota, which we understand that the Turnpike is no longer pursuing their project there. Does that also apply to the segment west of Chiliota?
For what's in the project priority list, Hazem, I'll have to get back to you on that, as we're still working with the Turnpike and DOT as to the project itself.
That was part of the same project.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you, Hazem.
Thank you.
Okay. Nick, you seem to be very popular today, as usual, now that we've gotten used to the virtual meetings platform. I have one quick question, and you can just comment on that. If it needs more explanation, we can go on the side for that later. There was a slide that says 7 projects were taken out, even though they had been funded because they were not feasible. Can you elaborate on how does that happen when you have a funded project that is not feasible? How does that happen? Do you go back and try to work the project so the funding is available for it?
So of those 7 projects, 6 of them were funded. 1 of them was taken off, and the project that was taken off was the State Road 46 project on the east side, as it went forward for PD&E, but design is no longer in the TIP. So we removed that from our project priority list, and it will be reevaluated as part of the 2045 long range plan.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nastasi, 2 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly. So under the safety and performance, I see that Orange Avenue shows it fully funded from Sand Lake to Hoffner. So I'm pleased that it's fully funded, but we've had no communication from the department as to what exactly they're pursuing. I know there was a study done that we actually conducted, but
actually, so Renzo, within the resurfacing project that DOT had programmed, MetroPlan contributed some of the TMA funds to incorporate the complete street improvements that could be done as part of the 3R project along that segment. And from Sand Lake up to Hoffner, that should complete a lot of the bicycle and pedestrian improvements. It won't get into the details of the landscaping and the other amenities. As it goes through Edgewood, it'll have some of the components from that corridor study, but it won't have that northern section. The 5-lane section is not included. That still has some significant right-of-way that is needed first.
thank you. I sure would appreciate some coordination.
Yep.
Just to understand what it is that's being addressed.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.
So how's that going to happen? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Nastasi. In the effort of time, I will take the last comment from Mr. Smith because we have 3 other presentations awaiting among other business.
Well, mine was just a follow-up. Mine was a follow-up on State Road 46 that was mentioned. because I know there's still fatalities happening out there, and that was actually the primary goal of a lot of that project once we went along for the head-on crashes. And I know the DOT did some different safety improvements, but I still am seeing fatality reports of that road and crashes. And so we're putting this off longer. It's just pretty disturbing to me, with Vision Zero and everything else, that we're putting this pretty critical road off, especially with the issues that are out there. So that's all I wanted to say about it. I mean, so.
And Chad, we're not dismissing the project. Just from the PD&E, it didn't warrant the widening from the traffic forecasts, but it doesn't mean that there aren't improvements needed on the corridor, which is why we'll be reevaluating it as part of the MTP to come up with probably a better project that could move forward for implementation.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everybody for your good questions. The next presentation, as promised by Mr. Trauger, Alex Trauger with MetroPlan. He promised last time he'll have another update for us on the 2045 MTP, status update and report on the needs assessment, methods, and approach. Mr. Trauger, floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I am back this month to really introduce you to, as our chairman said, kind of another topic in the 2045 planning process, which is assessing multimodal transportation needs. Go to the next slide, please. And I really want to talk about our planning approach here. So, as we discuss these needs today, I really think it's important to acknowledge a paradigm shift that has occurred. If you've been with us for a while, previous plans have been evaluated solely or primarily on volume to capacity ratios, which basically look at, as many of you know, how many cars fit on a road at a given time, which primarily yielded, long range planning projects as highway capacity needs and widening projects. And that was really it. And that would have been my presentation 5 years ago. Would have been all about volume to capacity ratios and asking the question, are we greater than 1? But it's a new day, and we have a new planning process here for the 2045 plan, which will really evaluate multimodal needs in using a comprehensive set of performance indicators to identify mobility improvement opportunities focused on our overarching planning goals and objectives that we've discussed in previous presentations. So much greater than a capacity-based plan. It's exciting to hear. We can go to the next slide, please. Given the complexity of the regional transportation system and really the unique functionality of each mode, we are going to be using several different approaches to analyze needs for the 2045 plan. These approaches will account for people walking and cycling, those using mass transit and automobiles, while also considering the movement of freight and goods across our regional transportation system. So, really the focus of my presentation today, I hope to introduce you to the methods and tools that we're going to be using for the 2045 plan. And then, as we move forward later this year, we'll be talking more about finding from our needs assessment. We go to the next slide, which I'll jump right in and talk about our bicycle and pedestrian approach. So, the really first topic is the, bicycle and pedestrian approach. Kathy, if you can advance 2 slides, please. Just wait for that to come up. But, really the bicycle and pedestrian needs assessment is focused around, 4 core areas. The first 2 are going to look at, what we have in place today. And then, our existing facilities, and then also, focused on, filling those gaps. Where are they and how can we fill them? And then the next 2 areas really about evaluating needs based on our existing network, but also considering our planned and our prioritized projects. So those existing projects on the books, we're not going to forget about those. We're really going to look at how we can add value and increase opportunity to supplement and really complement those existing priorities. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll talk about the bicycle needs assessment approach that we're going to be using for this plan. So the bicycle needs assessment is going to really utilize what we're calling a level of traffic stress analysis for the entire regional network. Level of traffic stress assigns a score to every street based on how comfortable it is to ride a bike on, based on factors such as traffic volumes, traffic speeds, the number of lanes, and whether or not a bicycle facility is present. As you can see on the slide here, scores range from 1 to 4. In a street or bicycle facility with a score of 1 or 2 is thought to be comfortable for most people. A score of 3 is comfortable for, or thought to be comfortable for confident cyclists. And a 4 typically has higher speeds and greater volumes, which could be uncomfortable even for more experienced riders. Go to the next slide, please. So a little bit more on bicycle level of stress. I'm actually going to kind of just take you through a little bit of the logic here. And this is how a bicycle level of stress is categorized. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward process. The methodology, as I mentioned before, screens streets based on speed, number of lanes, and the surrounding land use, residential or commercial. And this method, this is the method that we're going to use to assign scores for streets without, keyword without a bicycle facility, in streets that have wayfinding and sharrows only. So this would be like mixed traffic cycling. For streets with a bicycle facility, the analysis will also consider the presence and the type of bike facility, like separated or a buffered bike lane, the bike lane width, and the proximity to on-street parking given to those door zone conflicts. And as we all know, our cycle savvy folk who never want to be in that door zone. So as you can see here, speed, number of lanes, and then surrounding land use will be our process for simply and regionally identifying bicycle level of stress. The next slide, please. So really, why are we using this process? And I think it's really more about the results and how we move forward following this analysis and following the metropolitan plan adoption. So it's really ultimately we'll identify where programmed improvements and existing priority projects can be leveraged using the existing low stress network. So how can we add value, add additional connections to existing priorities to make them stronger, make them better, more impactful, to getting people riding and feeling more comfortable while they're on those bicycle journeys. So we'll be identifying additional supporting projects to maximize and optimize investment. And as I come back to you at future meetings, we're going to actually present some of these value-added opportunities and how they can be advanced further through the project development process. Next slide, please. So that was the bicycle needs assessment. The next slide, we're going to talk about pedestrian needs assessment. And as we consider pedestrian needs, we're going to be looking at how people walk along and cross roadways. Those are two critical points of walking along our network. So in identifying critical sidewalk needs, we're going to be assessing needs for sidewalks based on functional classification of the street, where a sidewalk is missing altogether or only present on one side of the street. So this is really about identifying gaps and prioritizing those based on their proximity to schools and into transit, where that walk trip, pedestrian trip is critical. Can you go to the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, we're also going to be looking at crosswalks, and crossing the street safely on foot is another critical focus, of our board and of this needs assessment. And with that being said, we're going to be conducting a regional analysis to identify locations for new marked crosswalks. To do this, we're going to be looking at the distance between existing crossing locations and looking at pedestrian and bicycle crash data that has to do with crossing behaviors. So this will really allow us to screen the entire 3-county area and identify opportunities that can be vetted in advance and with a more detailed analysis following the plan's adoption. Next slide, which I'll talk about transit. So transit's a key element of the 2045 plan for many reasons, obviously to address and respond to our rapid growth and kind of urbanization that's occurring. But our approach here, it really focuses on responding to public feedback and a focus on service implementation, getting the service out on the street. Public outreach shows that people want more frequency and to go to more destinations. So basically more buses to more places. And this approach is aimed at accomplishing our board's objectives of improving on-time performance, increasing transit system frequency, increasing ridership, and improving transit access to essential services, housing, and employment centers. Those are going to be our real core intent of this process. Go to the next slide, please. So the real process here in conducting the transit needs assessment, we're following a simple 5-step process. Step 1 is going to build upon existing plans and studies, the links TDP and route optimization study, some of the work that Orange County has done, to identify kind of a more robust Orange County transit plan, the Central Florida Regional Planning Study, as well as incorporating the findings from other multimodal corridor studies and transit feasibility studies. Step 2 really takes best practices and identify those potential solutions at a regional scale, so we can identify that regional transit vision. Step 3 begins the process of identifying cost feasible and unfunded transit projects and programs. Step 4 looks at implementation. So, what needs to get done when or now to see when projects can go live. Again, that focus on implementation. And finally, step 5, what policies and strategies need revisited to accomplish this regional vision. All this work is done in close coordination with Links, the Sunrail team, and as we move further into our analysis, we'll be working directly with our partner agencies and transit funding partners. Next slide, please. So as we talk about the roadway network, and this is really our final category for needs assessment, this looks at the roadway network, its users, and its many intersections. Our method here, like the other categories discussed, is really data informed and objective driven. So we're going to be using quantitative criteria to comprehensively evaluate roadway and roadway needs, and obviously the intersections in between. Later in the process, we'll be identifying projects and use the goals and objectives as a means of prioritization. We can go to the next slide. So again, this approach is really intended to provide decision makers with the best information possible to align our system level goals and objectives with corridor needs, and to really adapt to changing demographics and budgetary strains. And finally, and I think most importantly, it's really a guiding investment through a performance-based planning process, which is a federal and state requirement for NPOs. So as going to our first goal area, safety and security, the blue box to the left identifies the criteria we're considering for needs assessment, while the yellow or beige box on the right provides an example of how we will, how one of the criteria will be used. As we prepare our technical documentation for this activity, we will be clearly defining our methods for each criteria. So our tech report will provide an example, method, logic, and data source for each criteria that we're going to be utilizing for our needs assessment. So there'll be it'll be a robust analysis, but it'll be replicable as well. So for this goal area, the criteria are consistent for safety and security with the analysis criteria that we use for our prioritized project list evaluation. Basically, corridors with higher crash rates are ranked, and segments with higher crash rates are identified as corridors with greater safety needs. Pretty straightforward. Go to the next slide, please. So as we talk reliability and performance criteria, and Nick and I have discussed this many times in previous presentations, travel time reliability is a key indicator and new federal requirement. So in this category, we're considering reliability for both automobiles and commercial vehicles, trucks. And as we adapt this criteria for long-range planning and forecasting, we're going to be looking at the relative change in travel speeds for each of our alternative scenarios that I presented at last month's meeting. So we're going to be, for this particular criteria, future congested speeds, we're going to be using the travel demand model and some post-processing of that model to quantify this measure. So basically, roadway segments with the greatest decrease in speed will receive a higher score due to their declining performance. Existing data will be used for travel time reliability, similar to our streetlight data and the NPM, the National Performance Data Research Data Set that's used for the state highway system. But as we forecast reliability into the future, we're going to be using the model as a proxy for filling in that criteria. Next slide, please. And the next category is access and connectivity. And for this one, we're proposing 6 criteria. And for this analysis, we'll be using really a spatial analysis using GIS to calculate 4 of the 6 criteria to really identify population and employment centers near transit routes, and also identifying food and healthcare and cultural and recreational locations within a ½ mile of corridors. In this category, we're also going to be considering the findings from our critical sidewalks analysis from our pedestrian needs assessment introduced just a couple moments ago. So we're taking findings from our modal needs assessments and incorporating that into our larger roadway needs assessment to align with our board's goals and objectives. The next category is, move to the next slide, please. And the next category is health and environment. This group of assessment criteria really focuses on quantifying health and environmental planning objectives. These criteria emphasize providing transportation solutions that really contribute to improved public health. So, reducing the adverse health impacts associated with physical inactivity, and of course, our environmental justice objective of preventing disproportionate adverse impacts affecting minority and low-income communities. For elements of this analysis, we're actually going to be using the Healthy Mobility tool developed by VHB, one of our consultants, to quantify health impacts of existing and future transportation investments. We had some questions about this tool at our Citizens Advisory Committee, so we're actually going to be working, with our consultants to actually prepare maybe a pre-recorded review of the Healthy Mobility tool, so you can have a better understanding of how that will be utilized, since it's new, but I think it'd be super helpful in quantifying some of these health impacts and their correlations to transportation investment. We can go to the next slide, please. So our final goal area, as we've reached consensus, is investment in economy. And the final criteria group, focus on those objectives. And these criteria focus on cost of delay, the impacts of visitor travel, cost burden households, truck usage, and the intensity and proximity of truck trip generating land uses. So looking at land uses, both industrial but also commercial, that generate truck trips, and how we need to support the movement of freight and goods across the region. Our intent here is really to promote projects that expand, but also enhance economic prosperity. And you've probably heard me say this a little cheesy, but transportation is the economy in motion. So next slide, please. So putting it all together, and really before I move on, I want to acknowledge, and some of this, you're probably thinking about this, that some of the criteria that we've presented today may actually conflict with one another. But I think that's okay, because, and you have to think about this, the reality is our transportation system is a shared system, a shared network. It's very complex. It serves many users and many functions and many purposes. And the criteria that we've presented, I think, really encapsulate that conundrum, that shared system, our shared objectives. We're asking a lot of the system for a lot of needs. So I just want you to consider that as we move forward. So putting it all together here, how will we identify needs? And the answer is really a 3-pronged approach. We'll utilize a data model. So we're going to take those 30+ criteria that were presented in my previous slides and weave them all together using some GIS software to provide, like I said, a comprehensive and comparable analysis or replicable analysis over the entire regional transportation system. The next prong is the consideration of existing plans and priorities. So this will include the prioritized project list, local government capital improvement plans, the many links transit plans, freight plans, truck parking studies that have occurred, as well as bicycle and pedestrian safety action plans. And of course, our comprehensive constrained roadway network, which will help us identify where we can build and where we're constrained, where we need to look at alternative solutions, intersection improvements, technology solutions, transit solutions to meet the needs of our moving public. Finally, as relating to last month's presentation on scenario planning, we'll be looking at the unique impacts and needs significant with each scenario. And these impacts will be quantified and then fed back into the model using an iterative approach. And for this group, as we look at scenarios, we talked about how there might be increases in autonomous and connected vehicles. There might be increases and shifts in development patterns. So we're going to be altering the model, the trip rates of the model, densities, intensities within our socioeconomic data that are represented in each scenario, and then feeding that back into our model to understand what would happen under each of those scenarios, and do our very best to quantify that given the tools that we have today. Next slide, please. So the third step in the needs assessment is really project identification, really identifying opportunities, because at the end of the planning process, we have to put together a cost feasible plan that is implemented through our shorter term planning products, prioritized project list, and the TIP. So this slide should look pretty familiar. And as Nick mentioned, to ensure kind of a direct implementation and to ensure planning consistency, we're going to be organizing our metropolitan planning, our long range plan projects in alignment more with our short term programming documents. So there's more of a one-to-one and shorter term focus, that 10-year focus that Nick mentioned in his presentation. This will ensure, like I said, direct implementation, schedules will be maintained, as well as just a better understanding early on about eligibility consistent with our existing funding categories. So next slide, please. And kind of our final slide here that I'm going to talk about is really prioritization. And we'll come back and talk more about prioritization at later meetings, but I at least wanted to give you a heads up. And most of you are pretty familiar with this process, given how the prioritized project list has currently been developed with that data-driven, performance-based approach. So the 2045 plans prioritization process will take the finding from the needs assessment and basically rank corridors collectively based on their cumulative regional performance. So we're looking at all of those 30 indicators. We're going to incorporate feedback from the public, direct coordination with our local partners. So once this analysis is complete, we're going to be working closely, as we always do, with links, FDOT, and our local government partners to really refine and better define those projects in those lists to ensure that there's local support and consistency. And of course, we need to obviously be consistent and compliant with local comprehensive plans. That's going to be a critical element for our certification process. So that's, we can go to the next slide. I know I've covered a lot. I know I always do cover a lot during my presentations, but as I mentioned before, we will be coming back, talking more about the findings, talking more about the analysis. And as soon as I have technical documentation available, I will absolutely share that with you. And as I mentioned early on, our technical documentation will clearly define each of our processes. And also for the record here, we have a MTP working group meeting in about 3 weeks from now. We're going to be diving, if you want to dial in, listen into that one, we're going to be spending time focusing on this presentation, but instead of 15 minutes, it'd be probably an hour and 15 minutes. So we'll talk more about methods, processes, intents, and outcomes. So I appreciate your attention, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trauger, for this detailed and informative presentation. Please be reminded, if you have any questions, to use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. At this point, I will look for any raised hands to see if there's any questions from Mr. Trauger, and I see one right now from Ms. Brock. Mr. Brock?
Hey.
Recognize. Go ahead.
Hey. Back to the bikeway level of traffic stress, are you considering traffic volumes at all in that? Because even with low speed roads, if you have over 6,000 cars per day without separated facilities, it's not going to be an LTS of 1.
Sorry, I was on mute. So the simplified approach that we're using does not. It's just really looking at the number of lanes, speed, and land use. Let me talk to the team. We were trying to keep it a pretty straightforward analysis and not interject, too many other factors. I understand, absolutely understand your point, Kelly. We're really borrowing a process that's been used in other metropolitan areas in Florida, and we were running with it. But I'll talk to them to see how traffic volumes may may impact that. Right, yeah, we were just using, like I said, that kind of that correlation, with speed and number of lanes to kind of serve as a proxy for volumes and capacity. And we also, just another acknowledgement is we don't have roadway volumes for our entire system, or reliable volumes for our entire system. So not to, kind of nix your point, but, we're got to move forward with kind of the data that we have available to us.
Okay. Thank you both. Any other questions for Mr. Trauger? Okay, I see no other hands raised at this point. I do have a quick question. How often do you update this model? In other words, how often do you input new parameters or adjust your parameters? Is it based on a certain time period that you do semi-annually or quarterly, or is it as parameters change, you just go ahead and implement them?
So I'm going to answer that kind of in 2 points. We're going to be utilizing FDOT's Central Florida Regional Planning Model. It's version 7 of that model, which has a 2045 horizon year. So that's the travel demand model. Historically, we use the UAS, Orlando Urban Area Transportation Study Model. We're no longer maintaining our own 4-step demand model. We're leaning on DOT, and we've been coordinating directly with them, in that validation process. But when I also use the term data model, we're basically taking it's a GIS automation, basically, where we're stitching together all of those, 30 plus spatial criteria into an automated process. So we're going to be updating that for the plan, for the 2045 plan. And as we move forward with prioritization year to year, we may consider refining and improving upon that. But a lot of it's about quality data. And, we've done a lot of work in the past couple of years to make sure that we'll have the data necessary to run the model reliably over the entire 3-county network.
All right. Thanks again, Mr. Trauger. Our next presentation is FDOT's Traffic Incident Management Program by Ms. Cheryl Bradley, presenting on behalf of Florida DEP. Ms. Bradley.
Good morning. Thank you all for a few minutes of your time. We just wanted to share some information and provide an update on our Traffic Incident Management Program. I do oversee that program for District 5 as well as for CFX. And although it may not always seem like it when you're out on the road and you're the one stuck in congestion resulting from an incident, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to improve those processes with the primary goal of increasing the efficiency and the safety of our roadways. So for every minute that an incident remains on the roadway, congestion increases by at least a factor of 4, and the risk of a secondary crash increases by 2.8%. So in about 35 minutes, you're almost assured a secondary crash, and that secondary crash is often much more significant than the primary event, which may have been something as simple as a disabled vehicle in the travel lane. But now when another vehicle slams into that at a higher rate of speed, what started out as that insignificant traffic incident now can evolve into a multi-lane closure, multiple or high-level response for serious injury or fatality. And those secondary crashes often involve our responders. And unfortunately, we're seeing kind of an alarming trend over the last 2 years with the number of responders and responder units that have been hit while they've been working on or alongside the roadway. So responder safety is one of our top priorities, along with the safety of the other motorists involved in the incident and those who may be driving past or through the scene. So TIM has always been and continues to be largely based off of networking and building relationships and rapport and knowing who has what resources and how you can work better together. So we've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years doing some outreach, visiting police chiefs conferences, fire chief conferences, really getting the word out to our partners about DOT's level of participation and resources, and how and sharing some concepts of how we can move traffic safer around incidents. Next slide, please. Next slide. We also do a lot of training. There's a TIM training out of the Federal Highway Administration that teaches about responder safety at incident scenes, teaches us how to use emergency vehicles to block and position to keep our folks who are working the incident safe, while also helping to channelize the traffic around it. And that training has certainly paid off. And this is a picture of something we actually get some national notoriety for because it's very uncommon. But this was a crash down at Sand Lake and John Young. And if you see the red and black truck there in the center, I was involved in a T-bone crash. And what's a little hard to see in this image is the fire truck that's just in front of that truck, or I guess behind it, has a chain attached to it and is pulling it over to the shoulder. Next slide. This was all done before we could even get a road ranger down to the scene, but now you can see that truck is over on the shoulder. And the great thing about this is now the flow of traffic can continue, but more importantly, now every responder who's to follow, whether it's the officer doing the investigation, the tow truck there to pick up the truck, all of that can take place over on the shoulder where it's not impeding traffic and where those folks are in a safer environment to do their job. Next slide. Go back one. Okay, so a lot of what we've done with incident response or traffic incident management to this point has focused on, well, first of all, this is a TIM timeline. This is breaking down a traffic incident from the time the incident occurs to we get notification, responders on scene, get the incident cleared up and get traffic flow returned to normal. And a lot of what we've done to this point has focused on that time that we're on scene as responders. Next slide. That includes our Road Ranger program, which you all should be very familiar with. It's been a staple here on I-4 as one of the first programs in the state. And of course, we've had Road Rangers on CFX for some time as well. But in the last 2 years as a statewide initiative, we have worked to deploy Road Rangers on every limited access highway throughout the state. And we are now looking at some opportunities to possibly use Road Ranger services on an arterial level as well. Next slide. We also have a program called RISC, which is Rapid Incident Scene Clearance. And this is where we contract with certain towing vendors who have an extensive portfolio of ultra heavy duty equipment and trained personnel to handle the really big complex incidents, such as commercial vehicles that are overturned, dump trucks, tractor trailers that lose their load. This happens far more often than we would like. In the past, they have often attributed to closures of the interstate from anywhere from 2 to 4 to 10 to even 12 hours of keeping the interstates closed. Within our first year of activating RISC or starting the RISC program, our average clearance time was 83 minutes. So we'll have a new contract coming out soon. We're going to make some tweaks in there and see what we can do to make that even better. And we'll be adding another element called Safe Tow, which we've adopted from a program in another district. And basically what that does is also allow us to address the really minor incidents. So when we have a semi breakdown in the middle of the road, which again happens far more often than we would like and always on I-4 and always in the middle of peak traffic, it seems. So we would be able to dispatch a tow truck out just to hook up to that and drag it out of the road, get it to the shoulder, get it to the next exit, wherever we can to allow traffic to begin to flow again and to allow whatever they need to do with that truck to be done in a safer environment. Next slide. So then beyond that, what we started doing was looking at the number of those really big incidents, and those large scale risk type incidents accounted for only about 0.5% of the total incidents that we work in a year. So we wanted to start looking at, although we can save hours on those few incidents, we wanted to look at what we could do to start shaving off minutes on all the other incidents. And one of the things that we found in talking to our partners was that at DOT, we have the luxury of verifying what and where an incident is. When we get notification of an incident, we can find it on camera in about 1.5 to 2 minutes, see exactly where it is and exactly what we're going to. Our responders, on the other hand, do not have that luxury. And if they get dispatched to the wrong location, which happens far more often than you might think, it creates some complexities for them to respond, because now turning a fire truck around in the middle of I-4 or on CFX, especially during busy travel times, is not easy, and it's an unsafe maneuver. So it's often a matter of going down to the next ramp and making a turn or trying to get back to it. In many cases, it could even change entirely who is responding to the crash. So we started looking at how we could help close that gap and provide that information to our responders. And one of the ways we've done that, next slide, is through interoperable communications platforms. And we found one where a lot of our partners had bought into an interoperable communications platform for the use of mass casualties. In doing that, this needs to back up one slide, please. That system is sitting there waiting for one of those events that we certainly hope never happens. But in the event it did, the question becomes, how capable are we at using a system that's not used on a regular basis? At the same time, we had a need to identify a need to communicate on a day-to-day basis with traffic incident management with our partners. So we get the practice of using that system, but also feel a need in traffic incident management. Can you back up one slide, please? So this was an incident down on 528 on one of the airport ramps, and an overturned semi. This is what we could see on camera from the RTMC. We knew that we had obviously a commercial vehicle overturned. We activated risk. Now the next slide, please. But once on scene, the officer on scene was able to share information back with me as well. And we saw that we had a much bigger problem there than what we could see on camera. It was actually a load of limestone that had spilled, and our equipment was just crushing it and making it that much more complicated to remove. So it allowed us to then work with our partners to get a street sweeper out there to help finish clearing that up so we could open the ramp again. Next slide. We also use it for large scale events, such as when the president visited Orlando back in the summer. We coordinated with all the different law enforcement agencies that were involved in his escort and security detail, the airports, the trauma centers, throughout the entirety of the event, from the time he landed on the ground to making his way into downtown and then back out. Chief Orlando Rolone from Orlando PD, who has been with the agency, I think, for probably 25 years or more, said that this was one of the best coordinated events that he's ever seen during his time with the agency, just because we were all able to look at the same images, have communications with each other, and just a better level of coordination. Next slide. We also use it for the Brevard County shuttle launches. So again, lots of agencies involved, high levels of traffic. The last Falcon Heavy, they estimated 300,000 people came to the Space Coast. The one we just attempted on Wednesday, we think the number was probably significantly higher than that. So it impacts the entire region. It impacts Orange County and Seminole County, because that traffic backs up on 46, 50, 528 and creates some real traffic dilemmas that require a high level of coordination. So again, we can share video, we can talk, we can all communicate and coordinate the event real time. Next slide. And then going a step further, while we were working on this communications thing, what we saw was sometimes we pulled up video and saw that we already had some responders on scene. So we started looking at how long it was taking us to get notification of the event. And from that, decided that we could do a little bit better on finding ways to get incident notifications quicker in the process. So next slide. We have some research projects and some efforts with our partners who are sending information directly to us via text, via email. We're using other systems that were not originally intended for traffic, but serves the role of getting us that information quickly. A UF research project as to how we can do a larger scale CAD integration, computer aided dispatch, where their information comes directly from those emergency response agencies to us. Anything we can do to shorten that gap. And again, it may only shave 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes off an event between the incident detection and the notification verification process. But if we look at that across 15,000 incidents a year, that could have a major impact on our regional roadway network. Next slide. We're developing a TIM GIS tool, and this is intended to share with our partners so that there's a lot of information that we can put out there and share together. For instance, when we activate a signal timing plan, we have to shut down the interstate and we're going to push people off onto one of our arterial roadways. When we do that, two things come into play. One, it's usually the emergency responders who are out on the road who are the ones setting up the diversion, and they don't always know where we have those enhanced signal timing plans. And then second is just knowing what those plans are going to do to their other response routes when they're trying to get to other medical or emergency calls. So we can put that kind of information, where traffic signals are, who maintains them, where cross drains are for the environmental, for our folks at DEP, just a bunch of different information that we can put in there. So again, it provides a higher level of situational awareness and a better level of coordination and cooperation on scene. Next slide. And how this all comes together and what it means for our roadways. Next slide, please. We can see through some measured performance measures. Clearance times. So the state has an open roads goal of 90 minutes here at District 5 and CFX. We've set ours at 60 minutes. And as you can see in this first slide for District 5, we are just over the 30-minute mark there in the third group of the third bars. I like to look at roadway clearance because that's really what the driver experience is. That's the point of notification until the travel lanes are cleared. So you can see with that, we're still under the 40-minute mark, which is really good, but we're constantly looking for ways to drive that down. Next slide. CFX, you can see that we're also doing extremely well with those numbers. In this particular quarter, we did have a risk incident that went horribly awry, not by anybody's fault, but just the nature of the event, and drove our clearance numbers up there a little bit, but overall still doing very well and looking at the current quarter in the mid 30 minutes. So that's a great target from where we have been. Next slide. Overall, across the district, all 9 counties, we've seen a 3-year trend where those clearance times have reduced anywhere from 16 to 53%. A lot of that has to do with the local partners and their buy-in to the TIM principles and their participation in our TIM efforts. So again, a lot of that outreach, relationship building, and then some of it is just these new programs like the risk program that we've bought in. It really makes a big difference in some of those areas, especially our more rural areas. Next slide. And then finally, secondary crashes is where it really comes into play, protecting other people and avoiding the risk of more incidents that are going to also compound congestion and put people at risk. And if you look at this, you can see that we're also seeing a downward trend in our secondary crashes for District 5. Next slide. And the same for CFX. We're seeing that downward trend from the dotted line of where the number of secondary crashes across the district are going down. So we still have lots of work to do, and we're constantly looking for ways to make improvements, but by really integrating our TIM program with our operations and making it more than just the outreach, but also operational changes, kind of making a more encompassing program. We've seen a lot of improvements in the last 3 to 4 years and expect to continue on that path, as well as looking at what we can do to integrate our efforts with technology and look to the future with connected and autonomous vehicles as to how some of this can be achieved through automation. That is it for me. If you all have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Do we have any questions for Ms. Bradley? Please remember to use the raise hand function and unmute yourself if you have any questions for Ms. Bradley. I see no hands raised. Thank you very much, Ms. Bradley. Appreciate the presentation. Our final presentation of this meeting is by Mr. John Slott of Lynx. He will provide an overview of bus purchase, decision-making, and other consideration having to do with alternative fuel fleets. It's worth mentioning that this presentation was also given during the TESMO meeting earlier this morning. So for those who have attended the TESMO meeting, if you wish to leave this meeting, you're welcome to do that because this is a repeat. Mr. Slott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, committee, for having me here to provide this presentation. As well, this presentation will be given to the other committees as well as the MetroPlan board at the request of the CAC. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. The agenda really is a quick one, but for this committee really to give an opportunity to discuss the links, Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority's vehicle fleet, as well as how the links board is informed to make fleet decisions, and then talk a little bit about our propulsion transition from a traditionally diesel fleet or biodiesel fleet into CNG and battery electric. Next slide. As many of the folks in this committee know, we at Lynx operate multiple services throughout our community for Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. They include fixed route operations, as well as dynamic NeighborLink applications services, as well as paratransit services. In addition, we operate the Road Ranger activities here in Central Florida, and then have van pool services as well. Next slide, please. Really, the plans that you all review, as well as our board reviews and our teams build to inform our thinking, really constitute about 4 different plans. Of course, the fleet management program is a plan that is updated on a regular basis. Get into that here in a second. We're also informed by our transit development plan, the transit asset management plan, as well as the transportation disadvantage service plan. Next slide, please. So as a breakout of the fleet management program, in this plan, we actually articulate a plan that moves us over the next 10 years to a low, no emissions fleet, roughly 50% CNG and 50% battery electric. In the plan, you'll notice that we're historically a biodiesel fleet, 301 vehicles with a little bit of hybrid diesel electric hybrid, and then CNG at this point. We'll talk a little bit in the next slide about the CNG electric line, but really the question coming from the CAC was, what is the progression or anticipated progression toward battery electric? So to answer that question, can we go to the next slide? Sort of gave an anticipated mix. So this furthers what is in the fleet management plan, really looking at how we will potentially move from diesel and biodiesel through to a low, no emissions fleet. We believe because of our emergency support functions, as well as the 2,500 square mile region that we serve, that a mixed fleet is appropriate, probably in the 10-year timeline. In addition, of course, as team members know here, the FTA has a useful life requirement in the transit asset management plan, 12 years or 500,000 miles for fixed route vehicles. So we need to, of course, depreciate out those existing investments so that we don't encumber future grant awards by trying to diminish that fleet too early. So this shows the progression to a CNG and electric fleet. And as you notice, in 2020, we're making our first moves toward a battery electric fleet. That's depot level charging. We have 8 buses currently on order. First one being received hopefully this summer, pending COVID-19. Some delays there, but it looks like we're still on schedule for mid-July. And as you can see, this progresses to the complete fleet by 2028, being 50% CNG, 50% battery electric, with, as you can tell here, 90 plus vehicles already CNG. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as an agency, I think, and as this committee knows as well, and our community has been in very fervent support of, at the direction of Orange County and then Mayor Jacobs. In 2016, we established with leadership of the county, the city, as well as in partnership with NoPetro, the largest compressed natural gas station adjacent to the LOC, the Links Operations Center location. And really the intention there was to start to move toward low emission vehicles. That project and program has been very successful over the last 4 years, and we've already moved to 95 vehicles in the CNG fleet, with another 34 on order this year. So in this calendar year, we should get to 129 CNG vehicles, and of course that's diesel vehicles were no longer running and assisting in the emissions and useful requirement of the fleet. Can we go to the next slide? So where the CNG transition was a P3 with a private entity, we're affectionately calling the electric fleet transition a public-public-public partnership. So this one includes, of course, the City of Orlando and its leadership through the Community Action Plan, as well as defining the Links limo service as a battery electric vehicle fleet requirement. And then in addition to that, partnership with OUC from a standpoint of the electrification of transportation and specifically transit. And then of course, Links operating the bus system and maintaining the electric fleet. So the idea was, again, the progression. So this public-public-public partnership to learn with one vehicle, understand charging infrastructure, planning requirements, route changes, those types of activities. Of course, training, maintenance, and bus operations teams. Moving then, we won the Lono grant, and that allowed us to procure another 7 vehicles. So now we're scaling to 7 vehicles, so a total of 8 by the end of this calendar year. So now we get to learn how to run multiple buses in this environment, as well as all depot level charging. So the intention is no opportunity charging on route. This is a circular in the downtown area. Give everybody an idea. 2.5 buses is a megawatt of power. So all 8 of these buses represents roughly 2,000 homes of electricity use just for 8 buses. So when we talk about going to 150 buses, the infrastructure will be substantial, and the load on our utility partners will be significant. In addition, you all approved last week an update to the TIP amendment to support our grant application for an additional 6 buses on the limo. So that's the next progression of this, to learn even more significantly. If we're awarded that, that would be in winter of 21, if we receive that award. And then the fixed route fleet expansion, we expect in the years through 2022 and 28. And the intention there is to leverage things like the VW settlement and hopefully significant procurement requirements, as well as the technology gets cheaper, better, faster. Hopefully the differential between a CNG vehicle, which is about $560,000 for a 40-foot bus, and a battery electric vehicle, which is just about $800,000 per bus. Hopefully that differential will start to come down and make the conversion transition more acceptable and easier to pallet. So with that, I'd open the floor to any questions. And for all of those who've listened to this now 3 times, thank you very much. And hopefully it's getting better with each presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We will now entertain any questions from Mr. Slot. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I see no hands raised, so no questions. Thank you very much. Appreciate the diligence there. We'll continue doing the same presentation over and over. And we would like to hear further presentation and updates on this issue. We will now move to the next portion of our meeting, which is the action items. We have 3 action items to approve today. The first one would be approval of the April 22nd meeting minutes. I will need a motion.
I would move to approve them. There was one note I had sent to Lisa that was a correction on it. So as noted for the misspelling of someone's name.
All right, if you could.
She has
please,
that information.
Raise your hand and then state your name. I have a
This is
motion.
Chad Smith, City of Longwood.
Okay, thank you, Chad. And we will wait to see another hand raised for a second. Okay,
Mr. Chairman, Renzo Nastasi's hand was raised there.
okay, thank you. Mr. Nastasi.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, at this point, we will please unmute your buttons. So this is a vote call. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Second motion is the approval of the FDOT amendment for FY 2019-20 through 2023-24 TIP. This is found on tab 2 of your material package for this meeting, and will be presented by Mr. Keith Caskey. Mr. Caskey.
Hey, good morning. The amendment we have this morning includes 2 railroad crossing safety projects and located in Orange County. And then Lynx is receiving about $2.3 million in CARES Act funding for dealing with COVID-19. And the information on these is, of course, up on the slide there and also in your packets. So unless there's any questions, we are asking for your approval of the amendment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Caskey. Please raise your hand if you wish to make the motion. I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, you have a hand by Mr. Nastasi.
Okay, Mr. Nastasi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Motion to approve with just one caveat. I think it was brought up earlier this morning that the railroad crossing at Boggy Creek, if we can just get a little bit more information on that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So Caskey can provide that later, right?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
All right.
you have a second hand by
Okay.
Chad Smith.
I
Smith, go
second
ahead.
that as noted. I second it as noted. This is Chad Smith, City of
Okay,
Longwood.
thank you. I have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Please unmute your mute buttons for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion unanimously passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
The last motion is the approval of the update. The last motion is approval of the updating of the functional classification of the Wekiva Parkway. This is found in tab 3 of your information package. Mr. Steve Shams will present this on behalf of FDOT.
Hi, good morning. I'm Steve Shams of FDOT District 5 Planning. Thank you for considering this request, and I appreciate your time. Next slide, please. FDOT District 5 would like to request the functional classification of Wekiva Parkway, State Road 429 and 453. Functional classification is a requirement of federal highway, and its purpose is to establish a roadway's importance. It is used for planning, budgeting, programming, and fiscal management. It is necessary to meet federal requirements and is also integral to FDOT's work program and the MPO's transportation improvement programs. The subject segments are State Road 429 and 453. These roads completed construction on March 31st, 2018, and were open to traffic. Last summer, work was completed to enter these roads into FDOT's RCI and LRS programs. We also completed the roadway inventory and generated the straight line diagrams. At the time of inventory, These roads were given a proposed functional classification of urban, principal arterial, freeways, and expressways by FDOT Central Office. This classification is consistent due to its location within the urban boundary, its status as a limited access principal arterial, and the use of toll facilities. Completing the functional classification will satisfy the district's statutory requirement to functionally classify all significant roadways in the district. Next slide, please. On the left side, you see a map of State Road 429. This segment is approximately 8.2 miles long. On the right side, you'll see a map of State Road 453 in Orange County. This segment is approximately 0.85 miles long. And this same process to request functional classification will be done to the segments of Wekiwa Parkway in Lake County as well. I appreciate your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thanks, Mr. Shams. Do we have any questions for Mr. Shams? Seeing no hands. Oh, I do see a hand here. One moment. Sorry. That hand disappeared. Do I have a motion for approving this request? Please
A
use your
hand by Mr. Nastasi and Mr. Carnes.
Nastasi, please state your name and go ahead with the motion.
Renzo Nastasi, approve the motion. Motion to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Mr. Chris?
Christopher Cairns, I second the motion.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Do I have any discussions? Okay, this is a voice call. All muted members need to unmute their buttons. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is a couple of announcements. Our next TAC meeting will be on June 26th, and this will also be our third virtual meeting. There's a 2045 MTP working group meeting, which also will be held virtually, coming up on June the 16th. The MetroPlan board meeting will be held on June the 10th. At this point, we come to the members' comments. Are there any committee members who have final comments? If you do, please use the raise hand function so you can be recognized and allowed to say your comment. Anyone has any comments at this point? Okay. We now arrive at the second public comments option. If any members of the public wish to comment, please use the raise hand function and you will be recognized, or dial the *9 on your phone keypad and we'll unmute your mic after you are recognized. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 2 minutes if you have any. Are there any comments at this time? Mr. Kasky, do you see any?
Chairman, I'm not aware of any comments.
Okay, thank you. Are there any written or phone comments that were submitted before the meeting today?
No, there were not.
Okay. With that, at this time, if there's no further business, once again, I'd like to thank MetroPlan leadership and Mr. Gary Hartman, the staff, our hosts have been gracious and patient with us for making this virtual meeting run very smoothly and accessible to all. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next month, and this meeting is adjourned.